let's record. Cool, awesome. Cool, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Bosses of Knowledge. I think this is episode number 33. For those of you that are our avid listeners, you would have noticed last week or the week or last podcast, we misaligned the numbers and the podcast number, but that's because we just decided to drop DJ's podcast before the Twins podcast. That's all it was. It wasn't a mistake. So for those of you that have emailed and said, what's going on? That was what happened. We were aware of that. But anyway, enough about that. Welcome back to the podcast. Hannah, how are you this fine day?
Yeah, I'm good. Went for a run this morning, which is good to get into running because I haven't been running in quite a long time. So starting to get into it and enjoying it.
Yeah, awesome. Why running all of a sudden when winter's coming?
We have quite a few avid runners in our hall, and so we decided to make a running club. And I went on Wednesday and found out I am not an avid runner. I'm a pretty average runner, so I'm kind of setting myself the goal of getting to their pace and being able to show that I can be at their level.
Awesome. What a great motivator right there. And I guess, that leads us to the next question, what piece of knowledge do you put into your basket this week?
From running, I've just learned. Apart from running, I've learned at the start of the year, we were given some advice about, I got given advice that you can do everything, but you can't do everything at the same time. And the more I think about it, the more I'm learning that, you can do everything and you will achieve everything you put your mind to. But if you try and do it all at the same time, you either end up spreading yourself too thin, so you don't have time to actually enjoy what you're doing, or you just go to things and you're not putting 100% in. And so what I'm learning is that, yes, there's more things that I'd like to do, but A, I don't really have the time to fit it in, and B, I'm not going to be putting my full in. And if I'm not giving it my all, then there's not really any point in doing it because I'm not going to be satisfied in the end result.
Yeah, that's so true, because a lot of the times, we always want to do lots of things, and we feel guilty if we don't do things, and FOMO, right? We just want to get involved because of fear of missing out. And then at the end of the day, you're just doing stuff because you think that you have to do it as opposed to you want to do it, and then you don't do it properly. So that's an awesome learning, and it's a learning that that I think I take every day as well, because I'm like you. I like to do everything, but you can't do everything at the same time. I also have another. I'm just going to lead on that. There, a saying that I have is, if you do everything, you do nothing. Which leads to what you're saying, because if you do everything and not 100%, you're actually not doing anything. You're just half-assing things. Oops, language. But yeah. What did I learn this week? This week, I had a great conversation with one of my clients, because I do coaching as well as another business. And my client is 67 years old. And what I learned from him is it's never too late to keep learning, like never too late. And what I mean by that he is just about to start his PhD at the age of 67. And I was like, why are you doing? I was like, what? Why would you do that? It's like, why not? Like, why would I not? And it's like, I've lived my life. I've done some pretty cool things, and I want to just do a bit more thinking. So it's going to go back to my learning is, age is no barrier to learn. You don't have to stop learning just because you have stopped being at university or stopped being at school or stopped doing whatever you want to do. You can just learn just for the sake of learning, which I think a lot of us forget, that you can learn just for the sake of learning, not for grades, not for a job, just because you want to learn. And this is, I think, a great segue to introducing our fantastic guest. As always, we say this all the time, but every single week we try and bring in a fantastic human being, and it's the same this week. Welcome to the show, Trish.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you for choosing to come on. And before we started the conversation, I just commented to Trish to ask her where she was, and she's in Queenstown. What are you doing in Queenstown, Trish? I mean, that's paradise for some people.
It's kind of a weird story about how I ended up here, but I'll give you the short version to start. Yeah. It's basically my partner and I finished our degrees and decided that we were really burnt out and weren't really as happy as we would have thought we would have been graduating. So we basically packed up, ran away, and moved to Queenstown just before Christmas. So we've been here for about 3 months now. I've been working up at the Luge, which has been really fun, and also doing some of my other work at the same time. So it's been a definite change, but it's been really good. And I think we've managed to actually achieve what we were looking for, which was a bit more mental clarity, feeling a little bit less stressed, and just generally making sure that we're, not living to work, but working to live instead, and making sure that we keep that up in our lives. So, yeah.
I mean, what a great power start right there. You mentioned some key things there: burnout, mental clarity, working to live as well as living to work. It's fantastic. And I'm sure that'll come through in today's conversation. But before we even start and talk about where you are right now, let's talk about where you came from. So do you want to tell our listeners out there where you're from, and how? Yeah, let's start where you're from originally.
Yeah. So born and raised kind of in Dunedin, but did the majority of my schooling on the Kapiti coast, so just north of Wellington. Went to high school with Alicia, who you had on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, went to Kapiti College, studied there. Yeah, loved it. Absolutely loved it there.
Brilliant. So I mean, you're living. So you born and raised in Dunedin, then you went to school in the Kapiti College, which is in Wellington. And then you finished up school and you had a choice. And I was very lucky enough to meet you when you're near 13. And you're highly academic, you're a very smart young person. You obviously had choice to go wherever you wanted to go. And obviously, you made a choice. And before we talk about why you chose where you wanted to go, how was your thinking process at that time there? Because a lot of people think they have to know what they want to do at that age there. What do you think at that stage there?
Just as I was finishing up high school, I had a pretty vague idea. I'd been always taught when I was growing up that I was going to go to university when I graduated high school. So it wasn't really a matter of which pathway will I take in terms of, do I work, do I go to Polytech, do I go to uni? I knew I was going to uni.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of working out what I wanted to do. I bounced around a lot of sciences. Then I got to high school and realized that science was hard work. So decided against that, and I got really into the arts. So I got really into my English and a couple of other things as well. So really into classical studies, media studies. Psychology was a really big one for me as well. So I ended up settling on studying English and psychology at the time, which was great. And then I went to actually a Massey University open day. Sorry, Massey. Didn't end up going. But we did this 15-minute course on linguistics, which I'd never heard of before. I signed up for it just I need to fill a gap. And ended up falling in love with it and made it one of my majors at university.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, when I was preparing my courses for university, I was like, all right, I've got English, I've got linguistics, and I've got psychology, which was a lot, but I was really happy with that choice. And I'd already, in high school, I was a really big fan of balancing everything on my head at once. So I figured I'd continue that into university.
Yeah, because why not, right? Why not?
Why not?
Exactly, yeah. Why not? And I love what you mentioned there, that you explored at Massey and you found something that you didn't even know that you were going to enjoy, and I think that's a great revelation. It happens to a lot of people, that they think they know what they want to do, but something random comes in and blows your mind. Do you ever reflect about that and go, if I didn't actually sign up for that, I would never have known about linguistics?
Absolutely. Especially because it became such a huge part of my university life. And
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll talk about that eventually. But yeah, without the linguistics thing, it also really settled me on Otago for all sorts of reasons. So without that visit, I don't know if I would have ever found it. I might have, because the English and linguistics departments are very closely interlinked at Otago, but I also may not have found it at all. So it's very interesting to think about.
It's crazy how life works. So you ended up coming to Otago, which is fantastic. Everywhere is fantastic, but you chose to come down south. But you were a little bit different because you didn't choose to live in a hall in your first year. And what is that like for you? I know you have family there. What is that like to you, knowing that most of your peers were going to be living in a hall of residence and you were not?
I was absolutely terrified, to be honest. Yeah, I knew that halls were never on the card for me. I'd worked through high school, but I still couldn't afford to live in a hall. It just wasn't something that was practical for me. Luckily, I did have family, so I moved in to my grandmother's house in Dunedin, which is wonderful. And I ended up staying there for my full 3 years as well.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, so that was a really interesting choice for me. I had all these peers who were going into halls, and I was always very worried about it because a lot of people were telling me that I wasn't going to have a first year experience that was worthwhile if I wasn't in the hall. I wasn't going to have that like collegiate life experience.
Yeah.
So that was something that really scared me, especially because I'm not really someone who's particularly extroverted anyway. So I already struggle to make friends sometimes.
Yeah.
So the thought of excluding myself from this really key experience, just because it wasn't really necessarily accessible to me, was really stressful. Yeah, I was really worried about it, but I quite often played it off as like, no, I'm doing this because I want to. But yeah, I was really scared.
Yeah, and I think it's important to appreciate that it is quite scary because you're going against the grain, you know. Let's be honest, the narrative that's put out by every single tertiary provider out there is you need to live in the accommodation blocks because that's where you have the greatest experience. But as you mentioned, it is not financially viable for everybody, you know. It is a financial cost and not everybody can afford it. But that doesn't negate the fear. You know, the practical mind versus the subconscious mind are two very different things. You know, there's lots of things that we think are practical, but intellect, damn it, we really afraid. So how did you navigate that? Because like you said, you know, financially, you know, okay, cool, I can't do this. But outwardly, like, yeah, I'm good, don't worry. Because I remember when I was talking to you, you were, I've got this. But inside, you were understandably afraid. How did you navigate that? Because you land in Dunedin, your peers go into the halls, and you're like, okay, hey granny, hey grandma.
I was lucky when I moved down to Dunedin. My mum and my older sibling came down with me. They drove down with me. We had all my stuff in the back of this car that I just bought driving down from Wellington to Dunedin. So I had them with me for the first week. Got me settled in. My older sibling was probably about halfway through their masters at Victoria, so they had a pretty good grasp of what university was going to look like for me, even though they weren't at the same university as me. So they took me to uni, they helped me find my textbooks, helped me go get my ID card. So I shared a lot of that experience with my older sibling. Even though we weren't at the same university, we were still able to kind of bond over that. And it made me feel a lot more comfortable because they were there to help me guide me through that process. And like they had already done it before, so they knew what they were doing. So that settled me quite a lot, actually, being able to do that. But yeah, I think I didn't really let myself settle as quickly as everyone else was trying to let me. Within a week of moving to Dunedin, I was already working a part-time job, and I was already doing a lot of things that actually kind of bombed my social life a wee bit. So I think I really struggled to settle in when I started, but I eventually got used to it and it worked out anyway.
Yeah, it does work out. It's pretty crazy how when we are in different places, we try to keep ourselves busy to avoid the things that we are naturally trying to avoid. You know, for you, keeping busy means I now have a reason that I'm not doing this other stuff here. You know, it's just human nature, right? It's just human nature. But like you said, it worked out for you, which is why you got burnt out. But that's another story altogether. So what was your first year like? So you were living at home. You already had a job. You were basically doing the non-conventional university experience, if we speak that way there.
Yeah. My first year probably wasn't really a poster first year. Within my first month, I was diagnosed with a concussion, which had been missed by medical professionals for about 2 months.
Oh, wow.
So I was suffering with really large headaches and migraines. I couldn't look at screens for very long, which is very hard when all of your stuff online. And I just couldn't focus. I was tired all the time. I was sleeping probably 13, 14 hours a day. I had a period right before the mid-semester break where I didn't get out of bed for 2 weeks because just these symptoms were a lot.
Yeah.
So that made my first year experience really difficult. I was away from my family, who were a really big support network for me. Like I still had some of them, but I was away from my mum and my older sibling. So I quite often felt like I couldn't ask for help. I was trying to balance all these medical appointments by myself, these medical costs, still working to pay my rent,
Yeah.
and to do everything else that I needed to do. Was trying to balance a scholarship that I'd been given by the university, so I was still trying to do my sport so that I could keep that scholarship. So that meant that I ended up, my mental health was really tanking very, very quickly in my first year. I really struggled for a long time, which I think actually made a lot of like the concussion symptoms a lot worse, because on top of that, I was also really struggling with depression and anxiety, which I dealt with since probably early high school, but it was different not being at home dealing with those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, because I got to see in the journey there, and every time I saw you, you were like, "Yeah, I'm great," but internally we knew there was you were having your internal battles. But talking about battles, I want to talk to you about your sport, because we just brushed it, but actually let's speak about your sport, because yeah, let's tell the world what sport you're involved in, because let's not
Uh,
even let's celebrate the success as well.
So I've been practicing ITF Taekwondo for about 9.5 years now. Started, when I was 12 by accident. One of my friends had been bugging me for about 2 years to go to one of these lessons. And I was finally like, okay, fine, I'll go with you one night, only one night.
Yeah,
Nine
one
and a half
night.
years, 9.5 years later, I'm still doing it. They're not anymore.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and since then, just really grew a love for it. I've graded through the system, so I'm currently a black stripe. Been sitting on that for a while now, but that's okay.
yeah,
And I've competed a lot with the sport as well. I've competed probably about 4 nationals, 1 Oceanias, and 1 World Cup. So I've really been able to embrace myself in that side of the culture as well. But also on top of that, I think the main things that are really important for me about my sport is actually the art side of it.
yeah,
I got really engaged with like instructors courses and umpiring courses, really learning all of these fine-tuned parts of Taekwondo. And on top of that, also really engaging with like-minded people. So
yeah,
that was something that I always really enjoyed about it as well. Um, and with my success at Nationals in 2018 and World Cup in 2018, I was able to secure a scholarship with the University of Otago, which was really amazing.
and I think it's really awesome, because you know what, we when we do a sport or an activity, the biggest thing that you learn is you find lots of like-minded people. You know, whatever your sport is, whatever your activity is. Yes, you go there for taekwondo or you go there for running, like Tanya said at the start, but the people around you are all there for the same reason. You know, it doesn't matter whether they're a multimillionaire or a poor person, or whether they are whatever, right? At that point in time, they are the same as you, and you're there for that one very reason, which again might tie back to your first year, because now you're missing that community that you would have developed over the time when you were when you when you're doing your sport. And I love how you mentioned that the big thing for you apart from community was actually the art of doing the sport. You know, do you want to speak to that, about how that affected and trained your mindset as well? Because that would have changed you a lot.
Yeah. In ITF Taekwondo, we stick to about 5 tenets. So that's like 5 guidelines that we try and keep for ourselves, like personality traits or mindset stuff that we're trying to kind of embody in ourselves. So that's courtesy, integrity, perseverance, self-control, and indomitable spirit. So these are all lessons that I was taught from the age of 12 right up through these times as I was changing through high school, and then now also through university and now into working life. So they've always been really secure with me, trying to make sure that I'm upholding this. We've also got our student oath that we do as well at the beginning of every class, which is basically guidelines for how we can be good people.
Yeah,
One of the key ones for me was the last line is, oh gosh, let me remember. It's been a while since I've trained, but the last line is about making a more peaceful world.
yeah,
So that's something I always really wanted to remind myself of, because quite often people, when they look at individuals who do martial arts, they think that they're these really aggressive people who just get into fights all the time and they're really violent. But for me, it was really important to remind myself that that's actually not who I am, and that's not what my art is asking of me either. So yeah, just reminding myself that it is a peaceful thing. It is an artistic form.
100%. And I think this is why I appreciate and I really respect anyone that does martial arts, formal martial arts, not street brawls, for that, and I think Bruce Lee said it's all about brain before brawn, right? You're not there to fight. You're there um, if you can dispel a situation by using your words and instead of your actions. That's probably a better way to go. So huge respect to that. And we're going to come back to that line that you said, make the world a better place or a more peaceful place, because that, I think, is a theme that we see as you start finding yourself at university, which is why I went there. So your first year, so you have these amazing tenets that you are learning in your sport, but it's also part of your life. First year was tough for you. Did you get involved with the locals community then, or was that something you picked up in your second year?
So yeah, I signed up for the locals newsletter like before I even started first year. I was prepared. You'd told me about locals. I was like, great, easy, gonna get involved with that. Moved down to Dunedin week, didn't go to any of the events for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
And then I kept trying to go to HQ, which is where they've got like this room on campus where you can kind of spend time. I kept trying to go for a while. I was going, I shouldn't go because I didn't go to the O Week event. So now if I go, they're going to think it's really weird, which is not true. And then for a few months after that, we'd try and find it. It's really difficult to find on campus if you're not really too familiar. Now I can just be like, oh, it's up there, all good. But as a first year, I really struggled to find it. So I kept going and trying to look, and slowly breached this confidence throughout my first year of like, oh, I made it up the first flight of stairs, and oh, I found the doors, and oh, there's actually another set of doors on the other end of those doors. Eventually made my way in, sat in a tiny little corner, I think about September of my first year, so really close to the end of the year.
You made it, right? Yeah.
I made it. And I was sitting in this little corner studying. Couple of weeks later, I met somebody who is still actually my partner now, which is really cool, who was a part of the locals program. We started talking, and then he goes, oh yeah, by the way, I'm a part of this thing. I think I've seen you around a wee bit, but like, do you want to come hang out? I was like, oh, okay. And since then, I met people who are still my friends now. I'm actually coming back to Dunedin today to see some of them, which will be really nice.
Awesome.
But yeah, I kind of formed these really secure connections and these like really amazing friends through that one interaction that I had. But it took me a really long time to get there.
So I'm noticing a trend here, Trish. You had the one interaction for going to Taekwondo, and boom. You had the one interaction for going to linguistics class, boom. You have this one interaction with somebody and then become your partner, boom. And it's just crazy, right? These one interactions, which you don't know where they're going to happen, right? You have no idea, which is brilliant. But where I want to take the story is you got involved with this. So you got there in September, but in second year you changed up and you were a very different person, if I remember my timeline correctly. Tell us how you changed in second year as well, because were you working in the kitchens then as well, or was it kitchens in first year?
Yeah, so both first year and second year, and actually a little bit of third year, I was working in the university college kitchen. So that's about as close to collegiate life as I got in my first year, was serving all these first years.
Which should have been interesting for you, right? Because you're a first year serving other first years. I mean, that would have just, I don't know what went through your mind when you're doing that there. What do you think about that? That we just like, I'm just here for work. This is cool.
It was kind of strange. Like there were a few that like I saw them in class and then they were there at work, but they didn't recognize me. I just noticed them because I see them every evening.
That's right. Yeah.
And it was really, I would look at them sometimes while I was serving and I'd be like, man, it's really interesting. We're the same year doing the same thing, but we're having a completely different experience right now.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to reach out to people and be like, hey, I'm also in your class. And I was like, no, I'm at work. That's a bit weird. But it made me really reconsider some of the choices I had made and really think about the choices that I was going to be making continuing on, looking at these other people who were also living their first year experience. And actually those experiences in the kitchen that really helped me as I was getting more involved with the locals program as well.
Yeah, because it's a non-conventional first year, because you're not living at home. You are serving. You're working in a hall, and you're serving people that are living that experience that essentially you should be living if the world is a very different space. But it hasn't shaped any other way apart from a positive way. As you said, you've got lots of learnings in there. So in your second year, so in your first year, you have anxiety, depression. You go through these things. You have a concussion that you're going to get through. Second year is a little bit different for you. Yeah. What changes for you in second year?
Second year, a lot of things change. I finally got some friends, which is great.
Yeah, that's a good start.
I've been home for the summer. I went back to Kapiti for 3 months. So went home. I was also still talking to this guy from locals the whole time I was away. So we're doing 3 months long distance after meeting each other about 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I've just come back. I've got these friends now. I had applied to be a locals leader, so basically an RA, sub-warden, whatever they're called now. So a leader for the locals program. So I was getting involved with helping other people have this really wonderful O-Week experience that I'd kind of denied myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the major changes there is I came back to university feeling a lot more confident, because I also changed my major in my second semester of first year. I changed from psychology into classics because I bombed all of my psychology classes. Turns out it wasn't for me, which is fine. I should have really worked that one out with the science is hard work thing, but that's all right. But yeah, so I had changed my major. I was actually liking the classes I was going to, and I had people to share that happiness with.
Awesome.
And the good parts of my life.
Yeah.
And I was healed from the concussion, so I had a brain that worked again.
Yeah, well, that's also quite helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, just a little bit.
That is quite helpful. Tane, I'm just bringing in here. So, Trish just mentioned, psychology was tough. I'm sure you're seeing young people right now who are finding it tough and are either not going with it, or what are they saying to you, when things get tough?
It's interesting you raised that, because I just had one of my residents last night talk to me, and they're like, I need to have a word with you. And then I was like, what's up? And she's like, I'm not enjoying my major. I just don't like it. I'm not enjoying the paper. I don't know what I should do. Like, should I change my degree? And so I think it just needs to be more open conversations about, it is all right to change, and that you do have wriggle room in that first year to actually change what you want to do. And so when I was talking to her, I just sat her down. I was like, what are you enjoying? What other papers could you consider picking up? Were there other papers that you thought might be interesting to you? Because that's the thing, like, at the end of the day, you've got to give yourself other options. You can't just sit there and be like, I'm not enjoying this, and that's the end of it. You've actually got to seek other options and be like, well, I could enjoy multi-studies, or I could enjoy marketing. It's something different. It might not be what you're originally looking at, but it's giving you an option to be like, okay, I'm going to try something else and see how that goes for me, because what I'm doing now isn't working.
Yeah, which is what you did, Trish. You're like, okay, you could have just been like, oh, I'm not enjoying this, so this is it, my life is all over. But no, you said, okay, cool, I'm going to be proactive, I'm going to change it. And that's important. I think it's important for people to realize that you can change your mind, and it's okay. It's okay. But when you're 17 or 18, you don't think that, right? You go, oh, I need to have my whole life sorted. But because that's the narrative that's out there, right? You need to know what you're doing when you're 17 or 18, but actually, who knows that, right? So now, secondly, you're doing all this cool stuff here. Can you tell me when you started getting involved in the rainbow community as well? Because that's also a big part of your life. Was that in second year, or was that later on?
That was in second year.
So, yeah.
Was it? Yeah, 2020. So I had come out as queer in June, which was really a surprise to nobody in my life. Everyone already knew, but that's fine. I sent this really cryptic email to my family being like, by the way, guys, like, I'm dating this guy, but I also really like girls. And they were like, sure, whatever. So I came out in June, and then a month later ended up writing this application to be a schools liaison for Dunedin Pride, which was accepted. And then I had an interview, which went well. And then I started working for them in September of 2020. So basically what my role was to go into secondary schools throughout Dunedin and talk to school staff, school students, anyone who works with youth, and from there trying to work out how we can make experiences better for rainbow young people in schools. At the time when I started going in, a lot of the schools that I were talking to, I would ask the students the same thing. I'd be like, do you guys feel safe at school? Like, do you feel safe to be who you are at school? And the overwhelming response, which was terrifying, was they were coming back and saying no.
Yep.
So that really sparked me. I went to a school that was very accepting of rainbow people. Everyone at high school knew I was queer without me even having to come out. So that was great. So my experience at high school was really chilled out. So watching these other young people who were in my shoes what I'd done just a couple of years prior, I felt like I couldn't just leave them alone. Like, obviously it was my job to look after them, but also on a personal level, there was no way that I was going to just leave it at that. Yeah. So I started really working hard. I only had 4 hours a week and I was still working in the kitchens at the same time. So I didn't have much time.
And you were studying.
And I was studying.
Exactly, yeah.
Somehow in this mix.
Yeah.
Still competing and doing all sorts of other stuff. But I really made it my mission to try and improve things. And I'm still working in similar roles now, still doing the same kind of thing. But I can already see the change in secondary schools from when I started to now. So, like, for example, one of the things I'm most proud of is every secondary school that is either single-sex female or co-ed offers a gender-neutral uniform in Dunedin, every single one. Whereas when I started, I think we were missing about 2 on that list. So that's been a really big change and a really, I guess, quantifiable way for me to notice that I've actually done something.
Yeah. Well done. That's pretty awesome. And I guess that I'm going to step back a little bit. So when you decided to let your family know, what went through your mind? Like, were you worried? Were you nervous? Or were you like, oh, my family are pretty cool. They'll be, because you mentioned the word cryptic. Yeah. So I'm just going to go back to that before we talk about awesome stuff that you've done.
Yeah. So all of the responses, I don't even think my mom now has said that she's read the email. I know she has because we've talked about it since. And my older sibling was like, Mum saw the email and called me. But we've never talked about it and necessarily like I received that email and I felt this. Yeah. And then I had emailed both of my grandparents as well. So my Oma, who I was living with at the time, my other grandmother, who's
check your email. Check your email
check
while you're here.
Oma. I just sent you this long, like 3-paragraph email to tell you something, to which she just responded, yeah, I have a friend like that. All good, mate. So everyone was really chilled out. Like, my older sibling is also a part of the rainbow community. So and they received them really well. So I was never worried that my family was going to turn back on me.
Brilliant. Awesome. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And so here you are studying. You've changed your major. You are still doing taekwondo. You're working in the kitchens. You've taken on this role as a rainbow community liaison officer. How are you handling this in your life? I mean, at this point in time, was it just go for you?
Yeah. I've never not been busy. So they always say, like, give a task that you want done to a busy person.
Yeah.
Because they'll find out the most efficient way to get it done and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And that's kind of how I lived my entire life until quite recently. Was just, I'll take that. I'll do that. I can already find room for that. If you do it, don't worry about it. I'll get it done for you. So I was always just kind of grabbing more things to do, which in hindsight probably did not help me, but at the same time did give me a lot of access to a lot of experiences that I wouldn't have had if I'd said no to a couple of things.
Yeah. And talk about experiences, let's talk about your study experience as well. So while you were doing your study, you also have opportunity to do some stuff with a publisher or a printing. Was it a printing company? Or,
so that was in my final year of uni, my final semester. I was taking a paper, which I highly recommend to anyone who's doing a humanities degree. It was a paper called HUMS 301. So that is an internship and research opportunity paper. So I was given the opportunity to do an internship with Otago University Press for a semester. I was a data entry clerk. It was kind of boring, but so I was reading all of these journals. The Otago University Press brings out an biannual journal called the Landfall Journal, which is an anthology of like publicly sourced pieces of creative writing. So I was going through all of these journals going, okay, this person wrote this one, it's this kind of writing, this is the title, this is the genre, this is what pages it's on and which edition you'll find it in. And I was putting that into what they call the Omeka system, just so that if you ever Googled it, it would pop up and you'd be able to find out where it is. But on top of this, the more exciting part of it was that I was also conducting a research essay. I was doing my own research and then writing an essay about it. I decided, alongside Sue Wooden, who's the current publisher at the press, and also with my supervisor, Nicola Cummins, in the English department, we decided to see if there was a correlation between the amount of female entries that were published in Landfall with the way that society was about feminism at the time. So, for example, seeing if, as women got more rights in New Zealand, were more females also being able to be published in Landfall Journal, which we found there was. I was very proud of my graphs.
Brilliant. That's awesome.
Yeah, so, and like you could even see it with certain like massive events. So like, for example, I don't have my research on me, so I can't remember all of it, but like you'd see things like bills being passed for women to get equal pay, bills being passed for abortion to be decriminalized. All of these things have these kind of spikes, or at least a slow and steady increase, that show that women are able to actually engage with more in society, even in these creative fields, which can sometimes be considered feminine. We're still very male dominated until maybe 30 years ago.
Which is crazy, right?
Yeah. So that was really awesome. And on top of that, also seeing that like if there was a female editor or female staff on the Landfall team, that there were actually being more females published as well. I don't think they were ever really the majority. I think the only one that were the majority in was a Landfall journal, I believe in 1992, called the For Women Journal. It's for women by women, still only 60% women.
It's crazy, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But it was a really interesting opportunity to have a look into that and play around with some research.
What an awesome way to also look at history, right? You know, history and the impact of what a single change in the legal system in terms of males and females just has slowly I mean, I even use the word slow because it is slow, has just changed how females can actually start just being seen as equals in a different way, although it's taking a long time to do that though. So you must have really enjoyed that. I mean, yes, you've got the data entry stuff, blah blah blah, which is not the most exciting thing in the whole wide world, but at least the research stuff was inspiring for you. But let's go back to your, so this is all over the place because you have so many cool things happening in your world with your studies. So you mentioned linguistics. How did that start being a factor in your study as well?
I had a very similar opportunity in my final semester to the English one, where I was also in a paper, I think it's Ling 390, which is a research paper. I, for some reason, dedicated my entire semester to researching. So I was writing yet another research essay and conducting yet another research study on sociolinguistics and communicative ecology. You'd think I'd be able to say that, but no. So I was actually using my peers within the locals collegiate community, and I was sitting in on these meetings that the social committee has. So I should probably backtrack. Locals has a bunch of different committees. They have the social committee, the volunteer committee, and the academic committee, which are run by the leaders who focus on creating opportunities for first years in those areas. One of my really great friends was the coordinator for the social committee. So I went and sat in on their meetings, recorded everything they said, transcribed it all, and then kind of took that information and worked out what they were saying between the lines.
Wow.
to try and work out how they were working together and how they were like able to solve problems together. And about halfway through that research came the lockdown, August 2021 lockdown. So they had some really big problems to face, which made for some really great research for me. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. So you were doing this research during lockdown. How was that for you? How was that
Um,
interesting or testing, or was it like, oh, this is great, I'm an introvert, this is fantastic, I love it?
I loved the second lockdown. That
Yeah.
lockdown, I had a great time. I was at home by myself. I was just doing all my work, doing all my study. I was actually really productive, which is completely different to how I was in March 2020.
Yeah.
In March 2020, I was working in the kitchens as an essential worker. I was working full time, I think. Yeah, I was working a lot of hours in the kitchen as a supervisor, which I hadn't been trained for. So the parallel between those two lockdowns was very different. So March 2020, we'll get rid of it, wasn't important, sucked. But the August 2021 really gave me that opportunity to balance my own schedule, make time. I actually made more time for my friends, which was weird. Was able to use things like Discord. We played a lot of Minecraft on the local server together, and I got a lot of work done. I had these meetings with my supervisors all the time. I did as much as I could, and I really delved into my research because I wasn't able to go do my internship and I wasn't able to go to class, and I only had one other class anyway. So I was going to one lecture, which was twice a week, and then everything else was my research. So I really just kind of borrowed myself, read all these research articles, and I think without the lockdown, I don't think I would have got through so much content. I got through a lot.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Because you got a lot of dead time, right? Just you and your research. But also, you forgot to mention that you also picked up learning te reo at that time there as well. Was that at the same time?
A little bit.
Yeah.
With my employer, which is now Inside Out Koaro, still a skills coordinator at the time for Otago, now for Central South Island. We were offered the opportunity through Massey University's Toro Mai program to take part in some of their courses. So they have one on Te Reo Māori, which I engaged with, and also they have one on Tikanga Māori, which I also completed because there's not much else to do in lockdown, and it was enjoyable. So I spent a bit of time doing that, not so much just because it was work prescribed, although that did help. To be paid for that time, but also it's really important to me, if I'm providing a service that is trying to cater to minorities, I need to cater for all minorities and where they intersect. So making sure that I don't have terribly much te reo experience. Like, I was taught it through school because that's what happens when you grow up in New Zealand, but as a kid I'd been like, yeah, whatever, that's going to come up next year again anyway, why pay attention now?
Totally.
But doing these courses really helped me to realize that, no, this is something I really need to engage in. I talk with a lot of Takatapui youth, so they need me to understand where they're coming from, and they need me to at least meet them some of the way down the road.
Yeah, which is beautiful, and it's really interesting because a lot of the times we just take things for granted. We're like, I'm just gonna learn it just because I have to, not because I want to. But then as you get older, and I think the same things happen with you, Tane, where you're now learning stuff because you want to, because this is starting your journey in your te reo understanding as well. Is that true, Tane, as well?
Yeah, I've started picking it up, and this year it's been even more challenging, pretty much full immersion. But I think it's allowing me to do it in a space where I wouldn't otherwise do it. Sometimes you have to have somebody who pushes you. It's not the best motivation long term, but in that short term instance, when you're having somebody push you to challenge yourself in those settings, you're actually pushed to do it instead of being like, oh, I could just do this whenever I want. And when you do that, you just keep putting it off, as we've just talked about. So it's good to have somebody who pushes you to be like, no, this is the time to do it, and here's where you're going to see the growth.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've both seen amazing growth, and for yourself, let's forget about the other people, but for yourself internally and living in New Zealand, and I guess for you, Tane, this is your roots. So you just said, all right, cool, this is who I am. I'm acknowledging myself. And for Trish, this is the country that you live in, and It's part of who we are, which is very beautiful. So you finish off your degree. You go, right, cool, I've done my 3 years. But during those 3 years, you've done lots. You've done tons, right? So looking back on when you were leaving Kapiti and going, damn, this is pretty scary. When you finished up, when you got your degree conferred, what did you think about yourself? Did you ever stop and reflect and go, actually, man, this is pretty amazing, or this is pretty scary, or we're doing it now, or we're doing it right now on live?
I was going to say, I did not give myself any time when I graduated to have that amazing epiphany, because I slammed that week with everything that you could possibly fit under the sun. I graduated, my family came down to celebrate, which was amazing.
Yeah.
A few days later, my partner graduated, great. Same day, his 21st birthday, and then 3 days later, we moved to Queenstown. So I did not really give myself that time to appreciate what I had done. But since then, I have done a lot of reflecting. I think overall, like, especially in Queenstown, I meet a lot of people who are asking, like, what are you doing here? What have you done? So all the time I get to tell people I'm a university graduate, which is fun. I like being able to say that now.
Yeah.
But also it gives me a lot of time to really think that, like, oh no, this thing that I did is actually very special.
Yeah.
Because when you're in Dunedin, you're surrounded in university students who are all studying and all eventually graduate, or at least most of them eventually graduate. So you kind of feel like one of the many. Like, you're still doing something great, but also there's about 10 other people who have just got the same bit of paper.
That's right.
Whereas once you go out into the world a wee bit, it's really amazing to be like, no, I did actually do something really different. And how I got here is really unique. So I think that was kind of something I learnt after I left Dunedin. I clearly needed that space to have that self-discovery.
And that's so true, because when you, like, I had the same thing when I was teaching at Otago and doing my research and stuff. I didn't actually value, because everyone was doing it. You'd go to your office and everyone else is studying, everyone's researching, everyone is like, oh, so it diminishes the value straight away, because it's the norm. Like, you're living in this environment where everyone is learning, and it's only when I stepped away and I moved away and I was like, actually, wait a minute. This is not the norm. This is not the norm. What you're doing is not the norm. So sometimes it takes, you've got to get away to reflect back on anything in life, really. A bit like yourself with your sport. You were doing your sport and you would be living that sport, but as you step back, you go, actually, wait a minute, this is not the norm for everybody. I've actually accomplished something pretty awesome. So it's important to give ourselves some time to reflect, even if you reflect that I'm not a good runner. Hey, Tane. Yeah.
I'm not either, don't worry.
Reflection is important, right? It's important. But the one thing I want to come back to is burnout, because you've done all these things here. This is really awesome. You've done some amazing things, but in your own words, you're basically balancing on the top of your head with all the stuff here. What was the point where you realized, actually, damn, I'm actually burning myself out? Because you said you graduated and 2 weeks later you were in Queenstown. When that point would have come, was it then or was it before that you realized that actually? And what did burnout look like for you and feel like for you?
For me, burnout was unfortunately very familiar. I did it all through high school. I was, especially in my last year, I was doing sports, I was studying, I was taking 4 scholarship subjects. I've never really given myself the opportunity to slow down before. So burnout, I just went, that's a consequence of living, which is not true. No one listening should take that advice. That is incorrect. So I think it was in my last semester, even though I was really loving what I was doing, I was loving all this research, I was loving that one other paper that I was taking, I was hanging out with my friends, I was doing everything great, but I still felt wrong, to the point where I didn't want to engage with any of it anymore. I just wanted to sit at home, do nothing. Like, staring at a wall sounded like a really great activity, which is terrible. So, and my partner was feeling the same way. We were both like, oh, thankfully it's only one semester, otherwise, like, I'd want to drop out. Like, we've got one semester to go, but if it was any more, I wouldn't continue.
Do you think it's a part of your own success, like your own success of being successful with all the old things you're doing? So you just keep, like you said before, if you want something done, give it to a busy person, and you will probably say yes to lots of things.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you reached the stage here, and then how did you decide? Like, how did you decide this was it? This was what was the moment? Was there a definable moment that you go actually? Because you could be sitting at a wall today. You could be doing that, right? So what is that moment that you were like, the two of you were like, no, this is not okay.
It wasn't actually me.
Oh,
I had nothing to do with
that's even better.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were both starting to apply for postgraduate jobs, so jobs using our degrees all over the country. We basically picked a bunch of places we wanted to live and started applying for jobs. My partner got an interview for a local company here in Dunedin, and we were like, oh, this is great. You've done it. You'll smash the interview. You'll be awesome. And he got a call back saying that they didn't want him to do that job. At the time, I was crushed because I was like, oh my God, this must be absolutely destroying you. And he went, oh, that was the best thing I've ever had because now I know I don't want that. I went, how can you think like that? I was so confused.
Yeah.
But it took him about 2 days and he went, oh, I didn't want to do that anyway. Like, I was relieved when I got that phone call because
Yeah.
now I can do my own thing.
Yeah.
And he's always had this dream of living in either Wanaka or Queenstown. And because he's a commerce guy, he did a Bachelor of Commerce, he really likes numbers. So he ran all the numbers going, all right, this is how much you earn on minimum wage. This is how much rent is. This is how much we each pay now. And like, this is what expenses would be and all of that kind of stuff. And he goes, the numbers are kind of the same. So like, he had this massive, like, financially, this is fine.
Yeah.
I went, no, that sounds legit. And at that point, I kind of just went, screw it, we'll go. So it was very whirlwind from there, as we very quickly packed ourselves off to Queenstown to go look at flats, picked one, applied, got the call back, and we're like, cool, we'll move in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really me. I don't credit myself at all for this.
Yeah.
As in fact, it was all Taylor being like, why are we living like this? There's
Yeah.
no reason that we need to be stressed out, burnt out, living somewhere that isn't bringing us joy. So we ran away, and it's the best thing I've done in a very long time.
What great awareness as well, you know, because two things could have happened there. You both could have just kept on living the way you were, or the second thing is you could have just disagreed with him. You could have been like, no, I enjoy being busy. I enjoy this feeling, because that's all you knew, right? That was your, like you said, from the age of 12, from the minute you picked up the IT of Taekwondo, that was your life. So kudos to you both for actually being aware and actually taking the plunge, because it is a plunge, right? It is a plunge into the unknown. Yeah. And do you feel yourself way less pressure now? Do you feel a weight off your shoulders in a certain way?
A wee bit. I still let myself get swept up and stuff. So like at work there'll be drama and I'll be like, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm so stressed. And then I come home and I go, I don't have to deal with that anymore. That's at work.
Yeah.
So it's been really nice to have this separation, because I feel like when you're studying, it's kind of a 24/7 thing. If you've got an assignment due, you work on it at home till 3 a.m. If you've got a test, you're cramming all day, or you're worrying about it when you're hanging out with other people. But at work, once you clock out, it's done. And
Yeah.
especially the really important thing for me was doing a job that like didn't have much responsibility was actually really important to me, because I wanted to clock out, go home and be like, there's nothing I need to do. It's all done.
Yeah.
So I guess in short, yes. It
Yeah.
has been a really good experience for trying to remove that stress and seeing that I didn't have to live that way.
Awesome. Tana, does that resonate with you? What Trish said just now about when you're studying, it feels like it's 24/7. And again, because you're also committed to your role as an RA, you're committed to your role as a specs president, you're committed to your role in working for the Māori Centre, all these amazing things that you do. Do you ever feel like you? We've spoken this before as well. Do you ever feel like it's just go for you?
Yeah, it definitely does. It does resonate with me, and especially now being in the hall, I feel like no matter where I go, I still have the sense of, if somebody sees me, I have to be there for them. You know, it's one of those roles where it's a 24/7 job. You're not going to tell people, no, I'm not going to talk to you, or no, I'm not going to say hello because I'm not working now.
Yeah.
Now I'll walk on campus and I'll see one of my residents and we say hello and we talk. And it just kind of makes me feel like I always have to hold some sort of responsibility with my actions, which has its positives and negatives. Obviously, this is the job I wanted, and that's just something I have to live with as a consequence of being able to do something amazing like the job I'm currently in.
Yeah. But I guess, like Trish, it's important for you to also, for everybody, actually, not just you, I think for everybody to take some time out to actually look after yourselves, because once burnout happens, I mean, luckily for you, Trish, burnout has happened in a very positive way. You know, you've managed to get away to a place that's actually very beautiful, and you've got a job, and but for some people, they don't have that luxury. So it's important to look after yourself. Yeah. Trish, is there anything else that because I've done some background research on you that I picked up, anything that we've missed out that you've also achieved along the way, or that you like to talk about, that you think has defined you or has helped you define yourself as a person where you are at the moment?
I think the main thing for me has been like injury recovery. So like I mentioned the concussion I had in first year. I sustained another one in third year, because that's what happens when you do a sport where you get punched in the head a lot. But they were really big experiences for me, not only because I couldn't study and my brain hurt, but also made me prioritize why I was doing my sport. It made me completely prioritize my life. I had to make a really difficult call at the end, probably about midway through third year, of going, I can't spar anymore. I can't get back in the ring, because at that point I had 4 concussions before 25.
Yep.
And something I really value about myself is being able to use my brain and do daily things. So for me, I had to make this really tough call. I'd made sparring a part of my life. I wanted to take that to a world championship one day. But I had to make this call and say, I can't do that, at least not for another few years, because I need to let my brain recover and I need to be able to keep using it.
Yeah.
So that's really kind of helped me to define who I am, also, I think a really big thing for me was in university, in high school especially, I was defining myself by the stuff that I did, not by who I was as a human being and the values that I held. So like when people ask me about myself, I'd be like, oh, I do taekwondo and I study this and blah, 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 blah. Whereas something that's more important is to say, oh, I'm someone who really cares about these issues, and it's really important to me that I'm being respectful to all, I'm creating equitable opportunities for people around me. So changing that mind shift from I'm a person who does stuff to I'm a person that cares about stuff and has these really important values was a really big shift for me that happened throughout university, and through those injuries really helped me to come to that conclusion.
Yeah, and I guess also those seeds were planted in you for a long time ago when you started doing the taekwondo with those 5 tenets, right? They've always been there, and I guess they've now just come out. They've actually sprouted. And I really like your LinkedIn profile where you say you are committed to leave the world a better place in all aspects, and I think we're seeing that coming through, because with your rainbow community work, with the stuff that you're doing every day, with being an advocate. You're living proof that this is happening. So I have to take my hat off to you. So thank you for doing that for people that have come across you. We've been speaking for almost an hour now. Yeah, time flies, when you're having fun. So our podcast is called Bosses of Knowledge, and every episode we love our guests to give some sort of knowledge to fill people's boss of knowledge, and we're going to ask you the same thing. What maybe one or maybe even 2 pieces of knowledge would you like to give from your experiences to people out there that they could use and we could use as well?
As an avid listener, I've heard this section quite a bit, and I was sitting this morning being like, what do I want to say? What can I say that's different? And I wanted to pass on something that comes from my grandmother. I have no idea who actually says this quote. For me, it's my grandmother, but I'm pretty sure it's some philosopher. But something that I always grew up with was she would always tell me, especially after actually a really big achievement, is we'd have this conversation and she'd say, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. Was a massive part of my upbringing, was making sure that, like, yes, it is good to do good things and to be an important person, but it's more important that you're being a good person and putting good out into the world.
That's very powerful. I mean, I had goosebumps when you said that, because that is so profound. It's nice to be important, but it's important to be nice. I think a lot of people in the world forget about that second part, and I think that's a very beautiful piece of knowledge there. Thank you for sharing that. But also, I think you're a living testament of that. Like I've said to you, and I'm going to keep saying this, I've been very privileged to get to know you all these years, and I don't see you all the time, but it's a privilege to get to know you. So thank you for that. Tane, any last words for Trish as we round up?
Just don't be afraid to do the things you are challenged at, like running or Māori.
Awesome. What a great way to end. Trish, thank you very much for jumping on today. There is so much wisdom, so much knowledge, so much experience here that I'm pretty sure our listeners will really enjoy. I know I have learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure Tane is nodding, so he's saying he's learned a lot as well. So thank you very much. To our listeners out there, thank you very much for listening to our podcast. As always, feel free to like, comment, share. And if you listen to this on, say, Apple, rate us. It'd be great for us if we start rating us on the different podcast streams. We'd love to get this podcast out to everyone out there to listen to experiences. But the most important thing is not about us, it's about you. Make sure you fill your baskets with a bit of knowledge before our next podcast. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Trish, and thank you, Tane. Bye, everybody.